The Providence Municipal Court settles into its morning rhythm. It is a place of worn wood and fluorescent lights, where the air smells faintly of floor wax and anxiety. Judge Frank Caprio sits at the bench, a man who has spent decades reading the faces of his city. He adjusts his glasses, smiling at a nervous mother clutching a speeding ticket, his voice warm as he asks about her children. But the calm is fragile, held together by mutual respect. That balance shifts the moment the double doors swing open with a little too much force. Ethan Hayes walks in, not like a defendant, but like a guest of honor at a party no one else was invited to. He is 22, wearing a tailored blazer over a t-shirt that costs more than the bailiff's weekly salary. He scans the room with a bored expression, checking a gold watch as if the court operates on his personal schedule. Whispers ripple through the back rows. The older locals know the chin, the set of the jaw. He is the grandson of General Arthur Hayes, a decorated war hero whose statue stands in the park just 3 blocks away. But where the general carried the weight of command, Ethan only carries the weight of entitlement. Inspector Quinn calls the case. Ethan Hayes, charged with speeding, 65 in a 35 zone, and a supplemental charge of disorderly conduct involving Officer David Miller. Ethan strolls to the podium, leaning against it rather than standing behind it. He doesn't look at the inspector. He looks directly at Judge Caprio, a smirk playing on his lips. The judge's pen stops moving. The warmth that was there for the struggling mother evaporates, replaced by the sharp, assessing gaze of a man who knows exactly what he is looking at. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio says, his voice dropping an octave, the kind tone hardening into steel. "You seem to have mistaken this courtroom for a country club lounge. Stand up straight." The room goes silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seems to pause. Ethan blinks, the smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before reassembling itself. He straightens up, but the defiance remains in his eyes. He hasn't said a word yet, but his posture screams a challenge that Frank Caprio has seen 1,000 times before. "Do you know who I am?" And Frank Caprio, with 80 years of wisdom behind his eyes, is ready to answer. Ethan Hayes leaned against the podium as if it were a hotel bar, checking his fingernails while the clerk finished reading the docket number. He wore a suit, but with a distinct lack of care. Tie loosened, top button undone. When Judge Caprio looked down from the bench, peering over his iconic glasses, he didn't see the usual nervous energy of the Providence Municipal Court. He saw a young man checking an expensive watch, annoyed that the world was taking up his time. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio began, his voice carrying that familiar, grandfatherly cadence. "You are charged with speeding, 55 in a 30 zone, and failure to comply with a police officer. How do you plead?" Ethan didn't straighten his spine. He offered a smirk. "Look, Your Honor, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. I was in a rush, absolutely. But Officer Miller, he didn't seem to appreciate exactly who he was pulling over." The ambient noise of the courtroom died. The rustling ceased. Judge Caprio paused, pen hovering over the file. "Who he was pulling over," the judge repeated, tone neutral. "Is there a medical emergency I should know about? Diplomatic immunity?" Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "It's not about immunity, Judge. It's about legacy. My grandfather is General Arthur Hayes. Maybe you've heard of him? He commanded the regional division. He practically built this city. He's a hero." He dropped the name like a heavy coin, expecting it to shatter the proceedings. He looked around, expecting heads to bow. He wore the general's reputation like a cloak, assuming it covered his own flaws. Judge Caprio slowly took off his glasses. He looked at the young man, really looked at him. He saw the arrogance of someone who has never been told no, and the dangerous assumption that honor is genetic. "I know General Hayes very well," Caprio said softly, warmth reserved for the memory, not the boy. A man of immense discipline, a man who polished his own boots, a man who understood the weight of the law because he spent a lifetime defending it. Ethan nodded, mistaking this for victory. "Exactly. So you understand why this ticket is ridiculous. I'm a Hayes. We don't get dragged into court for driving a little fast. My grandfather's name means something." The air shifted. It wasn't the recognition Ethan expected. It was the drop in pressure before a storm. Caprio's eyes narrowed. He had seen veterans stand at attention here despite arthritis. Now he saw a boy using a hero's sacrifice as a coupon for bad behavior. "You think your name is a shield, son," Caprio said, voice resonating off the wood paneling. "But in this room, a name is just what we write on the record. It identifies you. It does not exempt you." Ethan Hayes leans into the microphone, not with the trembling hands of a typical defendant, but with the casual ease of a man who believes he is the host of the show. He adjusts the cuffs of a jacket that likely costs more than the bailiff's monthly salary. "Your Honor," Ethan begins, his voice smooth, practiced. "This entire citation is a misunderstanding at best, and a fabrication at worst." He pauses, expecting the room to nod in agreement, but the courtroom remains still. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting long shadows across the bench where Judge Caprio sits. The judge interlaces his fingers, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. He has heard 10,000 excuses in this chamber, from broken speedometers to medical emergencies. But this tone is distinct. It isn't the plea of the desperate. It is the complaint of the inconvenienced. "I wasn't speeding," Ethan continues, dismissing the radar reading with a wave of his hand. "I was flowing with traffic. If anything, Officer Miller was the danger." Ethan chuckles, a dry, humorless sound that grates against the quiet dignity of the municipal court. "He approached my vehicle like I was a fugitive, hand on his holster, shouting commands before I could even lower the window. It was aggressive, Judge. Borderline harassment." Ethan leans closer to the bench, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Honestly, it felt personal, like he saw the car, saw the name, and decided to take a little piece of the Hayes legacy for himself. Judge Caprio looks down at the police report, then back up at the young man. The judge's eyes, usually crinkled with warmth when greeting schoolchildren, have flattened into a steel-gray gaze. He taps the edge of the file against the mahogany. "So, Mr. Hayes," Caprio says, his voice low, devoid of the grandfatherly patience he is famous for, "you are telling me that Officer Miller, a veteran of this force with a spotless record, decided to hallucinate a speed of 60 in a 35 zone just to target you?" Ethan shrugs, a gesture of practiced arrogance. "Envy makes people do strange things, Your Honor. My grandfather, General Arthur Hayes, always warned me that people would try to tear us down." The name drops into the room like a heavy stone. Caprio doesn't blink. He knows Arthur Hayes. He respects the general. And looking at the boy before him, Caprio suspects the general would be the first to stand with the police. The judge leans back, the leather chair creaking in the sudden silence. "Aggression," Caprio repeats the word, testing its weight. "That is a serious accusation. But in this courtroom, the camera usually clears up who was aggressive and who was merely entitled." Ethan's smile falters, just for a heartbeat. Officer David Miller stands at the podium like he is standing at attention. His uniform is crisp, the creases sharp enough to cut paper, a stark contrast to the slouching, dismissive posture of Ethan Hayes at the defense table. Judge Caprio adjusts his glasses, the overhead light catching the lenses briefly, and gestures for the officer to speak. The room settles into that heavy, expectant silence that always precedes a confrontation of facts. Miller's voice is steady, devoid of the emotion that Ethan is desperately trying to provoke. "Your Honor," Miller begins, keeping his eyes fixed on the bench. "At 10:45 p.m., I observed a black sedan weaving through traffic on Elm Street. My radar confirmed 62 miles per hour in a 30 zone. It wasn't just fast, it was reckless." The judge makes a small note, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the vast room. Miller continues, describing the mechanics of the stop. "The driver didn't pull over immediately. He continued for 3 blocks, passing safe stopping points. When he finally halted, he refused to lower his window more than a crack." The officer pauses, glancing briefly at Ethan, who is currently inspecting his fingernails with performative boredom. "I asked for license and registration 3 times. The defendant finally spoke, but not to comply. He looked me in the eye through the glass and asked, 'Do you know who my grandfather is?' A ripple of low murmurs moves through the benches behind them. In Providence, the name Hayes carries weight. It means General Arthur Hayes, a war hero, a builder of community centers, a man whose name is on the library wall. But here, in the grandson's mouth, the name sounded less like a legacy and more like a weapon. I informed him that the traffic laws apply regardless of lineage," Miller says, his tone flat and professional. "He told me that his grandfather, General Hayes, practically built this precinct. He said, 'My grandfather commands respect, and by extension, so do I.' Then he tossed his license out the window onto the wet asphalt." Judge Caprio stops writing. He looks at the officer, then slowly turns his gaze to Ethan. The air in the courtroom grows thin, the atmosphere tightening like a violin string. Miller finishes his account. "I retrieved the license from the ground, Your Honor. I issued the citation for speeding and failure to comply. As I handed it back, he told me I was making a career-ending mistake." The officer steps back from the microphone. He doesn't look like a man whose career is ending. He looks like a man who knows the difference between service and servitude, waiting for the judge to weigh the gravity of the insult. The air in the courtroom thickens, heavy with the unspoken weight of a name that usually commands silence. Officer Miller steps back, his testimony a neatly stacked pile of facts. But Ethan Hayes is not looking at the evidence. He is looking at the gallery, then at the bench, his jaw set in a line of stubborn entitlement. He grips the sides of the podium, his designer watch catching the fluorescent glare. A subtle reminder of a lifestyle funded by lineage, not labor. "Your Honor," Ethan interjects, his tone hovering somewhere between a plea and a demand. Officer Miller treats this like a standard stop. "But there is nothing standard about my family's position in Providence." He straightens his spine, mimicking a posture he has likely seen in oil paintings hanging in his grandfather's study. "General Arthur Hayes didn't just serve. He built the foundation of safety this city stands on. When the police harass his family, they aren't just writing a ticket. They are disrespecting a legacy. I shouldn't have to explain that I deserve a certain level of professional courtesy." The phrase hangs in the room like smoke. Professional courtesy. A polite code for exemption. Judge Caprio does not interrupt. He lets the young man finish, lets the arrogance pool around his ankles until it is impossible to ignore. The judge adjusts his glasses, the movement slow and deliberate. He looks at Ethan not with anger, but with the fatigue of a man who has seen generations try to trade on the deeds of their ancestors. Mr. Hayes, Caprio says finally, his voice steady, devoid of the theatricality Ethan is trying to provoke. You bring your grandfather into this chamber as a shield. You hold his rank up like it's a driver's license. The judge leans forward, clasping his hands. I know Arthur. I respect Arthur. But the general is not the one who pressed the accelerator. And the general is not the one standing before me asking for the law to look the other way. The courtroom is dead silent. The fan in the corner hums, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension. You speak of his shadow. Caprio continues, his gaze piercing. But a shadow is just an absence of light. It doesn't grant immunity. You are asking me to judge a ghost, but I am looking at a man. And right now, that man seems to think his last name is a speed limit sign. The air in the courtroom changes. It is no longer about a speeding ticket or a lane violation. The atmosphere thickens, settling into the heavy quiet of a classroom right before a hard lesson. Judge Frank Caprio places his pen on the bench, a deliberate movement that signals the end of the legal argument and the beginning of something far more personal. He interlaces his fingers, leaning forward until he fills the frame of Ethan Hayes's vision. The young man, previously draped over the podium with the casual indifference of someone waiting for a valet, finally straightens up. The silence stretches, elastic and tense. Ethan, the judge says, his voice dropping an octave, stripping away the formality to find the human being underneath the attitude. You've mentioned General Hayes 3 times in the last 10 minutes. You wear that name like it's a suit of armor. But tell me something. Do you know how that armor was forged? Ethan opens his mouth to retort, perhaps to recite a rank or a medal count, but the look in Caprio's eyes stops him. It isn't anger. It is disappointment, which burns hotter. Caprio gestures to the flag standing still in the corner, the same flag General Arthur Hayes served under in conflicts that occurred before Ethan was even a concept. Your grandfather didn't lead men into fire so that his grandson could treat the law like a suggestion, Caprio continues, the words landing with the weight of a gavel strike. He commanded respect because he gave it first. He understood that authority isn't about owning the sidewalk, it's about protecting the people walking on it. The courtroom gallery, usually restless with the shuffling of papers and hushed whispers, is frozen. A veteran in the back row nods slowly, recognizing the code being spoken. Caprio isn't looking at the files anymore. He is looking at the boy who thinks he is a man. You think heritage is a VIP pass, the judge says, his tone gentle but unyielding. But heritage is a debt, son. It's a standard you have to meet every single morning. When you disrespect Officer Miller, you aren't showing how powerful you are. You are showing us that you don't understand the very thing the general spent a lifetime defending. Ethan shifts his weight, his designer sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum. For the first time, the smirk is gone, replaced by the unsettling realization that he is being seen, truly seen. Not as a general's grandson, but as a young man with empty hands. The air in the courtroom grows heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict, but this feels different. It feels like a lesson. Judge Caprio sets his pen down. It clicks against the mahogany, a sound sharp enough to snap the room's attention back to the bench. He looks at Ethan Hayes, really looks at him, past the expensive haircut and the posture of someone who has never been told no. Ethan is still waiting for the magic words, the dismissal based on lineage, but the judge's face is a map of disappointment, not acquiescence. Young man, Caprio begins, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling with the weight of 80 years of life and law. You keep waving that name around like a flag. General Arthur Hayes, a man of honor. a man who served. Caprio leans forward, clasping his hands. But let me tell you something about the uniform your grandfather wore. He didn't put it on so his grandson could treat the streets like a playground. He wore it to protect a system where the rules apply to the general just as strictly as they apply to the private. Ethan shifts his weight, the smirk finally faltering. The courtroom is still. The stenographer's fingers pause. You seem to labor under the delusion that influence is a currency here, Caprio continues, his eyes narrowing slightly behind his glasses. That because your last name is on a building or a plaque, you are above the line. But look around you. He gestures to the gallery, the single mother clutching a parking ticket, the elderly man waiting for a hearing. In this room, there are no generals. There are no VIPs. There are only citizens. Ethan opens his mouth to speak, perhaps another deflection, but the judge raises a hand. No, you listen now. You asked Officer Miller if he knew who owned this city. Well, I have the answer for you. Caprio's voice is steady, iron wrapped in velvet. Your grandfather does not own this city. You do not own this city. The law owns this city, and the law is blind to your pedigree. The words hang in the air, vibrating against the wood paneling. For the first time, Ethan Hayes looks small. The entitlement that armored him cracks, just a hairline fracture. But it's there. He looks down at his hands, the reality of the moment finally piercing the bubble of his upbringing. The silence that follows Judge Caprio's decree is absolute. It is not the silence of an empty room, but the heavy, pressurized quiet of a balloon about to burst. The hum of the ventilation system seems to grow louder, filling the gap where Ethan Hayes's arrogance used to be. For the first time since he strutted through the mahogany doors, the young man looks small. The designer hoodie, the posture of a prince surveying his kingdom. It all seems to shrink under the unblinking gaze of the 80-year-old magistrate. Ethan looks down at the podium. His hands, previously gesturing with entitlement, are now gripping the wood, knuckles white. He isn't angry. He is stunned. The realization hits him not like a slap, but like a cold douse of water. He glances sideways at Officer David Miller. 10 minutes ago, Miller was just a nuisance in a uniform, a nameless obstacle to be bullied into submission. Now, Ethan sees the fatigue in the officer's eyes, the patience of a man who deals with entitlement every shift. Ethan swallows hard, the sound audible in the stillness. He thinks of General Arthur Hayes. For 20 years, that name was a golden ticket, a key that unlocked every door in Providence without turning the handle. It was a shield against consequences. But in this courtroom, under Frank Caprio's watch, the name isn't a shield anymore. It is a yardstick, and Ethan is coming up short. He realizes that the general didn't earn his stars by cutting corners or belittling patrolmen. The general earned them in mud and chaos, leading men who trusted him with their lives. Ethan shifts his weight, the floor beneath him feeling less like a stage and more like a precipice. The smirk that had defined his face is wiped clean, replaced by a furrowed brow of genuine confusion and dawning shame. Ethan starts, his voice cracking. It lacks the polished veneer of his earlier arguments. He clears his throat, stripping away the bravado. I never thought about the uniform, or what it means to wear it. It is not a full apology yet, but it is the first honest sentence he has spoken all morning. Judge Caprio leans back, the leather of his chair creaking softly. He sees it. The moment the facade cracks. The general's grandson has crumbled, leaving just a 20-year-old boy realizing that respect is a currency you must mint yourself. not withdraw from an ancestor's account. Judge Caprio looks down at the docket, his pen hovering over the standard box for monetary penalties. In this courtroom, a fine is usually the end of the sentence, a period placed at the end of a transgression. But for Ethan Hayes, a check written from a trust fund isn't a punishment. It is merely a transaction fee for arrogance. The judge knows that if he simply demands $500, Ethan walks out the door with his wallet lighter, but his ego intact, the lesson bouncing off him like rain on a waxed hood. The silence in the room stretches, heavy and expectant. The veteran in the back row leans forward, his own service pin catching the dull light, waiting to see if justice here is blind to lineage. "Ethan," Judge Caprio says, his voice dropping to that conversational register that is somehow more intimidating than a shout. "I could fine you the maximum. Your grandfather would pay it before you even got to the parking lot. But that doesn't fix what's broken here." He closes the file, a gesture of finality that makes Ethan flinch. The young man stands straighter, stripped of the smirk that had been his armor when he walked in. "You want to trade on the general's name? Fine. Then you're going to learn what that name was built on. It wasn't built on speeding tickets or talking down to officers like Mr. Miller." The judge leans back, interlocking his fingers. "I am remitting the financial penalty. Keep your money. Instead, I am sentencing you to 100 hours of community service. But not just picking up trash." Caprio's eyes lock onto Ethan's. "You are going to the Providence Veterans Home. You're going to listen to the stories of men who didn't have a famous last name to protect them when bullets were flying. You're going to serve meals to people who gave everything so you could drive that car." A ripple moves through the gallery. It isn't a gasp, but a collective nod. "You think you're above the law because of who your grandfather is," Caprio continues, picking up his pen to write the specific order. "Now you're going to learn how to be beneath it, serving the people who actually hold this city together. You want the glory of the Hayes name? Go earn it." Ethan stands frozen, the reality of the sentence sinking in. It is a currency he cannot print: time, humility, and labor. For the first time, the young man looks small, not because he is being crushed, but because he is finally seeing the size of the shoes he claimed to fill. The gavel hasn't fallen yet, but the sentence hangs heavy in the air. Community service at the Veterans Center. Ironing shirts, serving meals, listening to stories from men who bled for the stripes Ethan Hayes tried to wear like a costume. Judge Caprio rests his hands on the mahogany, his expression softening from the stern arbiter of law back to the grandfatherly guide of Providence. The anger is gone, replaced by a quiet, piercing hope. "Ethan," Caprio says, his voice dropping to that intimate register that makes a crowded courtroom feel like a confessional. "You walked in here thinking your last name was a VIP pass. You thought Hayes meant you were above the line." He pauses, letting the hum of the ventilation fill the silence. "But a name is just a loan. Your grandfather, General Arthur Hayes, he built the credit in that account with sweat, with sacrifice, with years of sleeping in mud so people back here could sleep in peace." Ethan stands there, the designer hoodie looking suddenly flimsy, like armor made of paper. He nods, not with the dismissive jerk of the head he used on Officer Miller, but with a slow, heavy acceptance. "Honor isn't an inheritance," Caprio continues, looking over his glasses. "It's a paycheck. You have to earn it every single day. Today, you start earning it. Not for him, for yourself." The judge picks up his pen, signing the final order. The scratch of ink on paper sounds final, absolute. "I want you to walk out of those doors not as the general's grandson, but as a young man trying to be worthy of the title. Good luck. Thank you, Your Honor, Ethan whispers. The arrogance has evaporated, leaving behind something raw and real. He turns. The walk down the center aisle is long. He passes Officer Miller, offering a brief, awkward nod of contrition. As he pushes through the heavy swinging doors into the Providence daylight, the weight of the city feels different. It's no longer his to own, but his to serve. Inside, Inspector Quinn calls the next name, and the machinery of justice grinds on, fueled by the simple, radical idea that respect is the only currency that matters.